Hello, welcome to the Talent Parent Programme Planning for Sport webinar. Hopefully you should all be able to hear myself, and as we progress through this webinar you should also be able to see my screen as well. For those of you that have not accessed a webinar before, during the webinar please can you ensure that you have yourself muted and that your camera is also turned off during the presentation. So you should see there's a red mic button at the top of your screen to enable that. So if you click on the microphone, it should be red there. For those of you that are listening through the phone, please ensure that you also have yourself muted as well. So just before we start, I'd just like to introduce myself. So my name's Daniel Thompson, and I'm the Talent Programme Administration Officer for British Canoeing. So my primary role is managing the day-to-day administration and operational delivery of the England Talent Programme. I'm also leading on this newly developed Talent Parent Programme. In the room with myself is Emma Groom. So Emma is today's presenter. Emma works for English Institute of Sport and is the Performance Lifestyle Advisor for British Canoeing there. So I'd like to start by thanking you all for accessing this webinar today. This is the second webinar, part of the England Talent Parent Programme series. So this programme will better engage, support parents in the sometimes difficult and often underappreciated role that they play in the development of our talent athletes. So this Talent Parent Programme will comprise of curriculum delivered by webinar workshops such as this one. And this will also be uploaded a couple of days later onto the recently launched Talent Parent Programme webpage. So without further ado, I'll pass you over to Emma, who will present on the Planning for Sport webinar.
Thanks, Daniel. Welcome to everyone joining tonight's planning webinar or watching it at another time. We really hope that you find this useful. Daniel will be circulating a feedback form afterwards as well, so please do let us know if tonight hits the mark, and we'll welcome any feedback so that we can improve future sessions for you. As Daniel said, my name's Emma and I'm the English Institute of Sport Performance Lifestyle Advisor for British Canoeing. I work with athletes on our lottery-funded world-class programme, and the aim of Performance Lifestyle is to support the person behind the performance, which means that I'm involved working with athletes on areas such as their sport-life balance and education. For the next 10 to 15 minutes, I'm going to talk to you about planning for sport and cover a number of areas that will hopefully help you and your child work together and explain how we can all work together on this important area. I'm going to start with some key messages before moving on to looking at the reasons for planning in sport. We'll then go into a bit more detail on 4 areas: planning, communication, what-ifs, and coping and wellbeing strategies. There will be some time at the end for you to ask questions, so please feel free to fire those through as we go, and when we get to the end, I'll work through those questions and Daniel and I will answer those for you as best as we can. So to start with, some key messages that we hope to communicate throughout this webinar, 3 messages in total. The first one is that whilst we see planning for sport as being really good for the individual, we also see sport as a real opportunity for the individuals to develop personal skills such as planning and organisation. Whilst they're a paddler on the pathway, and this provides a real opportunity for them to develop skills on the water, we also see it as a really good opportunity to help them to develop those off the water as well. With the right encouragement and support, we see that individuals can develop their confidence and ability to take ownership of their own goals and plans. This means that the work that the coaches and Daniel and Richard and the others involved with athletes on the English Talent Programme will be guiding and supporting these young paddlers, but not always doing it for them. And in the same way, we don't expect you to be doing everything for them as well. And what we see as athletes continue to come through the pathway is that they're better able to plan and get themselves sorted when they've learned how to do so. The second message is around communication. We see planning and communication really coming hand in hand. Communicating involving the coach, the school and any other key people will enable the best support to be coordinated and in place for your child. Richard, Daniel and the team of coaches will work to get information and updates out to you as soon as possible so that you can make plans. And we really encourage you to ask questions, raise concerns and share what else you and the family may be working around so that we can help support you and your child in the right way. The last one is that planning for unknowns and with lots of moving parts can be really difficult. We know there might be lots of what ifs relating to education, what's going on at school with exams, racing, making teams, and we know that can present lots of different scenarios to plan for. We encourage all of our athletes to look at those different scenarios so that they feel really confident they can cope with the outcomes and have plan A's, B's and maybe even C's and D's lined up. So just to go into the context of today's session in a little bit more detail, why plan in sport? What you can see in front of you are just some specific reasons really that we see as being important and those main reasons for planning in sport. The first one is a pretty simple one. We want to support the individual's enjoyment and potential for success, and we know that planning and looking ahead can really help them to do that. We also know that planning can enable really proactive communication to take place between the athlete and everybody else that's involved in their support. And this means that it can be put in place ahead of the game. For example, our selection races and some of our overseas competitions often clash with exams. Early conversations about clashes can help identify what options there might be for managing them. We also know that family lives can be really busy, and as well as their sport, there's school, other siblings and other areas of family lives that need to be taken into consideration and planned for. We recognise that you are often the taxi service, the bank, and that this requires planning. So planning in sport allows for those practical plans to be put in place too. We also know that there are things that will come up at the last minute or out of left field, and planning in sport can really help the individual to identify the sources of potentially negative stress and distraction and take actions or consider strategies for things that are within their control. And finally, the ability to prepare for different outcomes and scenarios. And this is often an area that I work with athletes on throughout their athletic career, right through from their entry onto our world-class programme up to the point where they might be competing for Olympic selection and going to an Olympic Games. What ifs can often be quite scary to think about, and it's a really normal reaction not to want to think about them. But most athletes tell me that after preparing for the different what ifs off the water, they feel far more confident and able to focus on what they have to do on it. Okay, so just going into planning in a little bit more detail now. As a first step for a young athlete and a young person, we really encourage them to start to look ahead and think about all of the commitments and responsibilities and to help them form a really good planning habit in this area. This is the Hotspots annual planner tool, which I believe has already been shared with you, although this is perhaps a little bit different to the one that you might have seen, perhaps with some slightly different headings or detail on there. Visual planning tools are always a really good one to use because they make it really easy to see where those busy or stressful periods might be across all of the key areas that an individual has got going on in their lives. For us, this then opens up really good planning conversations, whether that's between yourself and the child or with us, the coach and the athlete, and the opportunity to ask questions. Some of the questions that we might ask when we have this information in front of us might be, what are you most looking forward to this year? What are you least looking forward to this year? What are the reasons for those different feelings? What goals do you have across all of these areas? How might the priorities change across the year? What support do you think you might need, and who could you go to for that support? We'll be encouraging athletes to complete this with you and to include any family commitments and dates at the start of the academic and paddling year. Communication, linking back to the second key message that we had at the start there. What we see in communication, that you and the child will be working really hard to communicate to some of those key individuals and organisations that are involved with their education and their sport. As I said at the start, we'll be doing our best to also make sure that you've got as much information from us as possible. There are some areas that we would really encourage and welcome communication on, whether that's from you, the child, or from both of you. Any information on key dates and commitments is really helpful. Tell us about dates relating to you as a family, their education, or anything else. Even if they're only a possibility, coaches would always prefer to have things factored in from the start where possible. And this means that they can then work with you to support those times and commitments as they come up. In relation to schools, we would really encourage you to share their sporting status with the school. And if that's something we can help you with, do let us know. We're more than happy to provide letters or other information that confirm their athlete status and what that commitment involves. We find that often really helps engage the schools and for you to access any support that they might need to get that balance right. Equally, please tell us about their educational goals and the support that you maybe do or don't have from the school as well. It's really helpful for us to understand what's going on in that area. So again, we can help develop those best plans and supports. The next one, big decisions. Please communicate and talk to us about the big decisions that may be coming up with your child. Encourage them to talk to the coach about these areas. We know that during their time on the pathway, there's likely to be a number of milestones and transitions that they might move through, whether that's related to decisions linked to school or their sport or other areas of their lives. And we know that, again, just being able to support that, or even just to be aware of it, can really help them. And the last one, worries and concerns. Please don't ever feel that you are being a problem by raising your worries and concerns with us. Richard, Daniel, the coaches are always there for you to ask any questions. And we know when it comes to planning, often plans can raise areas that you might have queries and concerns on, and we'd much rather that you communicated with us so we can have those good discussions. Worries and what ifs. This is often quite a big area that athletes will come and talk to me about, or that me and the coach and the team around the athletes on our Lottery World Class Funded programme will talk about. They seem to often will naturally fall out of most plans. People will see busy periods or stressful periods, or they'll start to think about the different outcomes that might come out of the various scenarios that are in their plans. One, it's always good to have a plan A and a plan B, or as many as might be helpful. And when working with athletes on plans relating to their future and career beyond sport, athletes have fed back that then going into those critical moments of performance, that's really helped to minimise the worry that those things can cause them in the moment. Worries and what ifs can be quite personal, and you're likely to have a really good idea of what you and your child might worry about. By having good, open what if conversations, you'll give them the space to talk about their worries and feelings. You'll have the opportunity to ask them different what if questions, and also just have the opportunity to demonstrate that you love and support them whatever the outcomes are. The example scenarios on the screen are just ones that we know often will come up that young people and athletes might worry about. And again, having those conversations between coach and athlete is something that we encourage and will be supporting athletes to do with you and their coach, so that they feel confident they can deal with any scenario. And I guess leading on from that, one of the real positives of planning is that you can feel confident you're giving yourself the best opportunity to achieve your goals. And we want all of our young athletes to have plans that they feel confident in. Part of this is recognising what they need to do to look after themselves, not just to support them to be at their best, but also to enable them to cope during busy and stressful times. The tool that you can see on the screen is one that the coaches and the team of volunteer psychologists are going to start referring to, and it's the concept of a stress container, or you may have heard of kind of the stress bucket, and we'll include a link that goes through to an interactive tool that you can have a play around with as well after today's seminar. The concept basically is that for the individual to think about what fills their stress container, what happens if it overflows, and what helpful and unhelpful coping strategies might look like. And we see this is a really important area that we can work with you and your child on, as well as educating them on the basics such as eating well, sleeping well, taking time out. We would be encouraging them to think about positive distractions, who they have in their support network, and how they can use them. And these are areas that we can all talk to them about, reflecting that to having these discussions is a real strength and not a weakness. You may also be the ones that spot the signs of stress in your child and can encourage them to do the things that you know might help them at these busy or stressful times. Going back to communication, we again would really encourage the athlete and you to share how they're feeling at different points in the year. We know that stress can build up at different points. And we don't believe you can separate the person from the paddler, and this will help us get that support right at those times if we all know what's going on for someone. So that's been a bit of a whistle stop around planning in sport, touching on some of those main areas around planning, communication, what ifs and wellbeing strategies, which we hope it's been helpful just to share a little bit more information with you on. For the next part of the webinar, we're just going to open it up to you for any questions. If you'd like to ask anything about any of the information that we've shared tonight, or if there are any questions on anything that we haven't covered, please just feed those through, and we'll see if we can answer those for you.
Yes, thank you for that, Emma. So there is a chat feature. So if anyone has any questions around this topic, planning for sport, which they wish to ask Emma now, if you just want to drop a question in that chat, and Emma will look to answer that for you. Whilst if anyone does have any questions and want to write anything down, we did have a couple of questions from some parents prior to this webinar. First question, there was a couple of similar questions relating around how coaches feel during time off, during training, during exam period and stuff like that. What is the policy in terms of what our coaches would feel around time off during exam time?
Yeah, good question. We don't have a policy when it comes to taking time off. We see, I guess, part of this planning process is the opportunity to have those early discussions around when it might be busy, when it might be stressful. So coaches would much rather that between paddler, parent, and then that they sit down and actually look at the plan for those busy periods, so that actually rather than having to kind of react at the last minute or have paddlers who think they need to continue to perhaps do the same level of paddling during those busy periods, actually by sitting down and looking at in advance, be more than happy to actually look at what balance might be right during that time. That might be having less sessions, it might be moving things around, and it also might be having discussions around actually what if it just gets a little bit too stressful? What do we do then? And coaches will be more than happy to work with you on that. I think from chatting to coaches, I think what can be a challenge is often where I think people will just try to keep going at a particular level and perhaps not communicate when they may be finding it hard, just through to the point where suddenly it means that actually they just almost have to drop everything when it comes to paddling or other areas. And I think we find that that's often something that the individual finds really frustrating, because they've just they've obviously reached their limit, and the coach just shares those frustrations because they know that means that they won't see them on the water and won't be able to support them until they've come out the other side. So I guess coaches are really happy to be supporting athletes to make plans that work for them during those busy periods, and the key point there would be to just have those discussions early, try to build plans that you feel can work, and then if they need to change closer to the time, have that discussion with them. Athletes have got our full support, particularly with educations and exams. We know that they're going to be going through GCSEs, A-levels, which are really, really important.
Similar question, but more relating to the parent on this one. So during an exam year, how do you encourage that training can be that reward and release from revision and schoolwork?
How do you encourage that training can be a reward and release? guess I probably would go back a step, and as part of those early conversations, be talking to them actually about what's going to help to keep them motivated during kind of, again, those sort of busy or stressful times. Ask them what rewards might help them. Ask them what might help provide a release. It might be that they need a release from exams, revision and paddling, and it needs to be something completely different. It might be around having a strategy in place where, they set themselves kind of targets to hit, and in reward for that, they're able to go paddling. But I'd always err on the sort of side of caution if it's almost if a reward is something that can also be taken away, that in some way that almost, but one becomes almost a punishment for the other. I would probably always err on the side of caution with that, but involve the individual in looking at, their own plans in terms of reward and release. And ideally they would be more of an incentive than a threat. Although we do know, again, from experience, often that the pressure of a deadline or the threat of something being taken away can often be pretty powerful. But that would really be something that the individual should be owning rather than something that any of us would want to impose on them.
And the final question that we did have was sort of how would you encourage the athletes sort of that's dealing with stress on competition days? Any sort of strategies relating around that at all?
I guess from my perspective, working with athletes on the person and the lifestyle side, a lot of what we have talked about today and what I would talk to athletes about would be about looking at how they can minimise potential stress on a competition day by having plans and taking care of things that are going on in the other areas of their life. The example of, perhaps the athlete who knows they need to make the team to stay on funding, will often come and want to have really good plans in place for what if that doesn't kind of come through for them. So I guess that would really be where I would come at it from. If the question was more about actually kind of dealing with stress on the water, and perhaps getting into more of that kind of mental performance mindset, then that's perhaps something that can be talked about a bit more in any of the webinars that deal with more performance psychology and things like that.
Yeah, that's probably an area that the performance psychologists will touch upon in future webinars there. So if anyone else doesn't have any further questions to ask Emma, I'll just make a few concluding remarks there. So thank you, Emma, for your time there today. So you talked about the reasons for planning, the opportunity to identify key hotspots during their sporting, academic and also social life there. It's an opportunity for the paddlers to develop skills on and off the water. And the parents' role to encourage and support their child to take ownership of their goals and plans there. We talked a bit about what ifs, so planning for the unknown, having a plan A and B, and also even a plan C there, and minimising the negative stress that paddlers can have there. So with that note, this webinar will become available on the Talent Parent Programme webpage in a couple of days' time, along with additional resources relating around this topic area. Resources around the stress container bucket concept will be displayed on the website as well. So thank you all for tuning in to access this webinar today. As Emma said at the beginning, we will be sending out a feedback survey at the end. So if you do have want feedback on how you felt this webinar was, then please do so. Thank you all for accessing this webinar this evening, and have a good evening.